Emily Carter felt the weight of change pressing against the walls of her quiet home on a warm Sunday morning. The kind of morning that should have felt peaceful, but instead carried a strange tightness in the air. She had spent years building a life around responsibility, raising her son Ryan on her own after his father had faded from their lives before Ryan could even form memories. Emily had grown used to doing everything alone. Morning rushes, late-night homework crises, broken appliances, scraped knees, and the endless list of grown-up decisions she never had time to question. She had learned to smile even when she was exhausted, learned to be calm even when her heart felt frayed, and learned to put herself last because that was simply what a mother did. But now, watching Ryan move around the living room, packing the last of his boxers, she felt a sharp mix of pride and heartbreak. He had landed a job across the country, a good one, a real start to a bright future. She had dreamed of this day, yet, standing there, she wished she could slow time just a little before everything changed. Ryan kept moving quickly, stuffing chargers, notebooks, and stray items into bags, determined not to make the goodbye feel heavy. But Emily could see the softness around his eyes, the unspoken understanding that this moment meant more than either of them wanted to admit. She tried to offer small, encouraging comments, but her voice occasionally cracked, and she swallowed her feelings before they rose too high. She knew this wasn't about losing him. It was about letting him grow. Still, when a child becomes the center of your world for more than 20 years, stepping back feels like losing a small part of yourself. Ryan paused suddenly, holding a jacket in his hands, and looked at her with an expression she didn't recognize, too serious for a simple goodbye, too thoughtful for a casual moment. Emily felt her stomach dip, unsure what was coming. He walked closer, his voice lower, calmer, different. "Mom," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I really want you to say yes." She blinked in confusion, already bracing for a practical request: money, help with a last-minute task, maybe permission to take something sentimental from the house. But the way he stood there made her heart beat faster. She nodded for him to continue. He set the jacket down, rubbed the back of his neck, and let out a slow breath. "I want you to start living for yourself again." Emily's breath caught, her mind halting as if the world had briefly stopped turning. She expected 100 things, but not this. Ryan kept going, speaking quickly now, as if he'd been practicing the words in his head. He told her how he had seen her give up so many things over the years, opportunities, friendships, simple joys she never made time for. He admitted he used to pretend he didn't notice because he was a kid and didn't know what to do about it. But now he was grown, and he wanted her to step into a life that wasn't built only around him. He reminded her that she was still young, still kind, still full of warmth, still deserving of something more than routines and quiet evenings spent alone. Emily felt her eyes sting, not out of sadness, but because she hadn't realized how clearly her son had seen her sacrifices. She tried to laugh it off, but Ryan shook his head gently, refusing to let her hide behind jokes or deflection. "Mom," he said softly, "I want you to be happy. Not holding everything together, happy. Real happy." Hearing her son speak with such maturity made her feel both proud and deeply vulnerable. She hadn't expected him to worry about her future. She had spent his entire life trying to protect him from worry. But now the roles had shifted, and he was giving her permission, no, urging her to step into a life that wasn't defined by survival or routine. The quiet house suddenly felt too small for the thoughts swirling in her mind. She realized she didn't even know what happiness for herself looked like anymore. She had spent years in motion: work, bills, chores, raising a child, repeating it every day with barely enough time to breathe. And now that chapter was ending, whether she was ready or not. She reached out and touched Ryan's arm, not trusting her voice. He smiled in a way that held warmth and certainty, like he believed in something she couldn't yet see. The emotional shift was subtle but powerful, a passing of the torch. A moment where she understood that her son was stepping into his life, and he wanted her to do the same. His surprising request echoed in her mind with a depth she couldn't shake. She didn't say yes immediately. She didn't say anything at all. But Ryan's words opened a door inside her that she hadn't realized was still locked. For the first time in years, she wondered what it would feel like to dream again, to hope again, to choose something for herself without guilt. She watched him gather the last of his things, watched him prepare for a life full of possibility, and felt something shift inside her, a quiet courage she hadn't felt in decades. When he hugged her before rolling his suitcase out the door, he squeezed her with a tenderness that made her swallow hard. "Promise me you'll try," he whispered. She couldn't speak, but she nodded, and he seemed satisfied as the door closed behind him. The house fell into a silence that should have felt lonely, but instead it hummed with the promise of something new. Emily inhaled deeply, feeling the unfamiliar space of a life that finally belonged to her again. And although she didn't yet know what she would do with it, she knew that everything had just changed because her son had made a surprising request. And deep in her heart, she knew she would say yes. Asterisk. Emily spent the rest of the afternoon moving through the quiet house as if she were walking through memories instead of rooms. Every object reminding her of the years she had spent focused only on survival and motherhood. She began sorting through old boxes she hadn't opened in years, determined to clean the place now that Ryan had officially stepped into his own life. She moved quickly, wanting to stay busy so her thoughts wouldn't drift too much, but it didn't work. Every corner of the house carried pieces of who she used to be, and she felt both curious and unsettled as she sifted through them. Then, in a stack of old birthday cards and forgotten keepsakes, she found a photograph that made her still completely. It was a picture of her and Daniel Woods, taken almost 10 years earlier at a small community event. They weren't posing like a couple, but the closeness between them was unmistakable. He stood beside her with a relaxed smile and his hands tucked in his pockets, while she leaned slightly toward him, unaware of how naturally she had gravitated toward his warmth back then. Seeing his face again was like being pulled back into a different version of herself. A version she had quietly locked away. Daniel had been her closest friend during a time when she felt overwhelmed by life. He showed up when she needed help fixing the car, when she needed someone to talk to late at night, or when she simply needed to laugh after a long week. He never pushed for more, even though the connection between them was clear to anyone who saw them together. There had been a softness in the way he looked at her, gentle and patient, as if he was waiting for her to trust her heart again. But Emily had been afraid to let him in. Raising Ryan alone meant protecting him from any uncertainty, and she couldn't take the risk of bringing someone into their lives unless she was absolutely sure. So she had pulled back slowly but steadily, choosing safety over possibility. Daniel had respected her decision, stepping away without resentment. But the distance had cost her something she hadn't fully understood until now. As she stared at the old photograph, she felt a mix of regret and longing wash over her. She hadn't let herself think about him in years, telling herself that life had simply moved on and some things weren't meant to be. But now, with Ryan's request echoing in her mind's start, living for yourself again, the boundaries she'd built around her heart began to soften. She wondered where Daniel was now, if he still lived in the same town, if he had found someone else, or if he too had filed their almost story away in a quiet part of his life. Before she could sink too deep into her thoughts, she heard footsteps behind her. Ryan had come back into the room to grab a charger he had forgotten. He noticed the picture in her hand before she could hide it, and his eyebrows lifted slightly. "You kept that?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but failing. Emily shrugged, suddenly feeling exposed, but Ryan gave her a soft, knowing smile. He sat down beside her, studying the picture for a moment before speaking in a low voice. "You still care about him?" he said, not accusing or teasing, just stating what he saw. Emily tried to deny it, but nothing came out. Ryan waited, giving her space to breathe, then added gently, "I remember him, Mom. He was good to us. And you smiled more when he was around." That simple observation hit her harder than she expected. She had been so busy building a stable life that she hadn't realized how clearly her son had seen the quiet parts of her heart. She set the picture down and admitted softly that Daniel had been important to her once. Maybe more than she'd allowed herself to admit. But timing had been wrong, and she hadn't felt ready. Ryan shook his head, not in disagreement, but in understanding. "Life doesn't wait for the perfect moment," he said, sounding older than his years. "But people like him. They don't come around twice." Emily felt her chest tighten with something that wasn't quite pain and wasn't quite hope. She told herself it was too late, that years had passed, that Daniel had probably moved on, and that reaching out would only stir old feelings better left alone. But Ryan wasn't convinced. He gently nudged her shoulder and said, "You gave everything to me. Maybe it's time you give a little something back to yourself." His words held a quiet truth she couldn't ignore. She realized that part of growing older wasn't just losing things, it was also recognizing the chances you still had, the unfinished stories waiting to be revisited. After Ryan left the room again, she sat alone with the picture resting on her lap. She studied Daniel's easy smile, the calm in his eyes, the way she had leaned toward him without realizing it back then. She remembered the sound of his voice, steady and warm, the way he listened without rushing her, the way he stood by her side without demanding anything. A man like that didn't demand presence, he offered it. And she had walked away from that kindness not because she didn't want it, but because she'd been afraid of hurting herself or Ryan again. Now she felt a different kind of fear, the fear that she had let something real slip away. She placed the picture on the table, her heart beating a little faster as she thought about the possibility of seeing him again. She didn't know where he was or how he would react if she reached out, but curiosity nudged her stronger than hesitation. Ryan's request had opened a door she didn't want to close. She realized she wasn't the same woman she had been back then, tired, guarded, stretched thin. She had grown stronger, calmer, and more sure of who she was. Maybe that meant she was finally ready for something she hadn't allowed herself to want. As evening settled outside the windows, Emily knew the moment wasn't just about finding an old photograph. It was about rediscovering a part of herself she had hidden away. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in years, she felt the spark of possibility. The photograph had done more than bring back memories. It had awakened hope. And deep down, Emily knew hope was the first step toward living again, a step her son had asked her to take, and one she suddenly wanted to try. Emily sat at her kitchen table long into the evening, the house unusually quiet after Ryan had left for his new job. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the weight of stillness. The photograph of Daniel Woods, carefully set on the table, seemed to pulse with memories, a reminder of laughter, late-night talks, an unspoken affection that had quietly shaped her life in ways she hadn't fully realized until now. Her fingers traced the edges of the photo almost unconsciously, and she felt a longing she hadn't admitted to herself in years. The idea of reaching out to him had lingered at the back of her mind since Ryan's words, "Start living for yourself again," but fear kept her rooted in place. What if he had moved on? What if the moment had passed forever? What if she embarrassed herself by trying? Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more confusing than the last, till finally she realized that the hesitation itself had become heavier than the fear. She needed to know. She needed to see if the connection that had once felt so natural still existed. If the man she had quietly loved from a distance all these years might still be there. Her fingers hovered over her phone for several minutes, before she took a deep breath and dialed the number she had found online. The first ring made her chest tighten, but when his familiar voice answered, saying, "Hello," Emily froze. It was deeper than she remembered, calm but unmistakably him. She felt her pulse quicken and a flutter of nervousness combined with excitement that she hadn't experienced in years. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Years of unspoken words, lost opportunities, and quiet longing seemed to fill the silence. Then, in a soft voice that carried both disbelief and hope, Daniel said, "Emily, is that really you?" Her lips curved into a nervous, emotional smile as she whispered, "Yes, it's me." The words felt strange, but right, as if speaking them aloud gave her permission to exist in a space she had long avoided. Daniel's voice held a catch, and Emily sensed the same mix of vulnerability and eagerness she felt herself. "I never stopped hoping you'd call," he admitted, and she could hear the years of waiting in that simple sentence. It stunned her, but also warmed her heart in a way she hadn't realized she had been starving for. She laughed quietly, soft, nervous sound that seemed to startle even herself. I I know it's been a long time," she replied, almost unsure how to continue. Her mind raced through all the scenarios she had imagined since finding the photo. And suddenly the reality of hearing him speak again made the years shrink into a single fragile moment. Daniel exhaled a sound filled with relief, as if he had been holding his breath for the entire decade since she had walked away. "I've thought about this day more than I can count," he said. Emily's chest tightened. Her mind kept questioning the practicality, the timing, the what-ifs. But her heart felt its own rhythm, faster and surer than her thoughts. She realized that all the time, all the waiting, all the distance had not diminished the connection. They had only made the anticipation stronger. She hadn't expected this to be so immediate, so vivid, so stirring, and yet here it was. The familiar pull, the warmth in his voice, and the shared memory of what they had once been together hit her with an intensity she wasn't sure she was prepared for. But that she could not deny. Daniel suggested meeting in person, and Emily hesitated for only a moment before agreeing. The idea of seeing him face to face after so many years felt thrilling and terrifying all at once. She wasn't sure if she was ready to confront the past, the feelings, or the possibility that some things had changed irreparably. But she also knew that if she didn't try, she would regret it forever. Her mind replayed countless scenarios. What if he had moved on? What if the connection was gone? What if she wasn't the same person he remembered? But she pushed the doubts aside, telling herself that this was about courage, about embracing life instead of retreating from it. She spent the night tossing and turning, imagining the conversation, the laughter, the silence, and the moments where words might fail them both. She realized how much she had missed having someone in her life who understood her, who had been patient and kind without ever demanding anything, and how that understanding had left a void in her heart she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. Every memory of Daniel felt sharper, more vivid, as if the years had only polished the edges of what they shared rather than eroded them. She kept picturing his smile, the way he would tilt his head when listening, the calm steadiness in his presence, and she realized she had never truly stopped caring for him. Not in all these years. The next morning, Emily's nerves were still a whirlwind as she got ready for their meeting. She picked out a simple outfit, something that felt like her, and avoided overthinking what she should say, telling herself that honesty would be enough. Driving to this small lakeside cafe where Daniel had suggested meeting, her mind swirled with anticipation, fear, and hope. She imagined all the ways the reunion could unfold. From awkward silence to heartfelt laughter, from tentative conversation to something deeper and undeniable. When she arrived, she saw him immediately by the window, standing as if he had been waiting for her all this time. He looked older, slightly more lined around the eyes, but entirely recognizable. Entirely Daniel. Her chest tightened, a mixture of relief and longing. And she realized that, despite the years and the distance, the connection was still there, palpable and electric. He turned toward her as she entered, and the moment they made eye contact, a strange calm washed over her, cutting through the nervous energy in a way she hadn't expected. Daniel's smile was slow, gentle, and full of emotion, and Emily felt her own lips curve into a smile that matched his. The room seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of time and memory. A place where everything felt suspended and possible. As he stepped toward her, voice soft but steady, he said, "I'm glad you came." Those words, simple as they were, carried years of hope, waiting, and unspoken love. And Emily felt the barriers she had built around her heart begin to fall. In that moment, she understood that the past was not a chain, but a bridge, and crossing it might finally allow her to embrace the life and love she had long denied herself. Every fear, every hesitation, every doubt seemed to dissolve in his presence, leaving only clarity. She wanted this. She wanted him. and she was ready to take the first step toward a new chapter, guided by the courage her son had inspired in her, and the love that had quietly waited for its moment to return. The morning after Ryan had left, Emily woke to a quiet house that felt emptier than it had in years. But instead of the usual weight of loneliness, there was a strange sense of possibility lingering in the air. She moved through the kitchen slowly, sipping her coffee, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional bird outside the window, realizing how long it had been since she had spent time simply being alone, without rushing, without planning, without holding herself together for someone else. The emptiness was not painful. It was a space she could finally fill with something that belonged to her, something she had long denied herself. Ryan's words the night before kept echoing in her mind. "Mom, you've spent my whole life giving me courage. Maybe it's time you let someone give you some too." The thought had stirred something in her, a quiet daring, a willingness to take a step she had avoided for decades. She didn't want to just exist anymore. She wanted to live. She wanted to let herself feel again, to embrace hope and maybe even love. The photograph of Daniel Woods, which had been on her table since yesterday, caught her eye. His calm smile, the warmth in his eyes, and the memories they shared suddenly felt less like a past she had to leave behind and more like a path that could lead somewhere new. The idea of reaching out to him had once been terrifying, but now it felt like the natural next step. A chance to reclaim a part of herself she had kept hidden for too long. She grabbed her keys without overthinking, telling herself that hesitation was only fear disguised as caution. Driving through familiar streets toward the lakeside cafe where Daniel had suggested they meet. She felt an unusual combination of nervousness and excitement. Her mind replayed every memory of him, the way he had always listened, the quiet patience he offered, the laughter that had once filled their afternoons. She remembered the way he had never pushed her, never demanded more than she could give, and yet had always stood by her side when life became heavy. Emily realized that people like Daniel were rare people who could love quietly, fully, and respectfully. As she parked and walked toward the cafe, her heart beat faster, a mix of anticipation, longing, and fear. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if time had changed everything? The doubts were quick and sharp, but they couldn't overpower the pull of hope. The quiet certainty that she wanted to see him again, that she wanted to open this door no matter the outcome. Inside, Daniel was waiting, standing near the window, scanning the small cafe with the same calm expression she remembered. When their eyes met, a warmth spread through her chest that made her breath catch. Time seemed to compress. The years between them disappeared as if they had only been paused. He smiled slowly, a smile that carried recognition, relief, and an unspoken invitation. Emily felt a nervous smile tug at her lips in response, realizing she had been holding her breath for this moment longer than she had known. Daniel stepped forward, and the first words that left his lips, "I'm glad you came," struck her with the weight of all the years they had spent apart. Every fear she had carried the what-ifs, the doubts. The uncertainty felt to her now like shadows dissolving in the morning sun. She realized that the life she had built without him had been strong, safe, and necessary, but it had also been incomplete. And now she had a chance to explore what had been waiting quietly beneath the surface all along. They sat together at a small table by the window, the morning light washing over them as they started talking. The conversation began awkwardly at first, circling around everyday things, how life had changed, how work had gone where people had moved but slowly. Naturally, it shifted toward memories, laughter, shared experiences, and feelings that had never fully faded. Emily felt herself relaxing in a way she hadn't known she could anymore. Her shoulders loosening, her voice growing softer, but more honest with each word. Daniel listened with that same patience she remembered, responding gently, his eyes never leaving hers, giving her space to speak without judgment or interruption. It was astonishing how familiar it all felt, like returning to a place she had always belonged, a home she had once closed behind her. She realized that even though the years had passed, their bond had not weakened. It had simply waited, quietly waiting for her to notice it again. And noticing it now felt like breathing after holding her breath too long, urgent, necessary, and invigorating. As they continued talking, the conversation turned to the future, two possibilities. Two choices they could make now that their lives had shifted in ways neither of them could have predicted. Emily realized how much courage Ryan's words had given her, how his encouragement to live for herself unlocked a willingness to step into something she had denied herself for too long. She felt the past dissolve not in forgetting it, but in understanding it, learning from it, and moving forward. Daniel's presence was steady and grounding, a reminder that love could be gentle and patient, that it didn't have to demand perfection or instant solutions. It could simply exist, strong and true, ready to grow if nurtured. Emily felt her heart opening, a warmth spreading from her chest, reaching her fingertips and toes, a reminder that life still had room for connection, laughter, and companionship. She remembered all the small moments that had defined their relationship: shared smiles, quiet support, long walks, and conversations that seemed endless. Sand realized that those moments were still alive, ready to continue if she allowed them to. By the time the morning had fully shifted into afternoon, Emily felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in decades. The weight of responsibility, the constant vigilance, the lonely nights, all of it had shaped her, but it had not defined her entirely. She could embrace a life that included happiness, love, and connection without guilt or hesitation. She looked at Daniel and saw in his eyes the same realization that the years apart had not diminished their connection, but had made it resilient, patient, and waiting for the right moment. She smiled, a slow, deep smile that carried relief, hope, and the faint thrill of a new beginning. Daniel reached across the table, brushing a hand gently over hers, and she felt the simple power of touch, warm and grounding. Neither of them rushed, neither of them forced words or promises. They simply allowed the moment to exist, full and alive. Emily realized that love didn't always need grand gestures or declarations. It could begin quietly, subtly, with a willingness to show up, to listen, and to open one's heart. This was the beginning of that kind of love, the kind that had waited patiently for her to be ready. And as they sat there, side by side, with sunlight streaming through the window and the soft sounds of the cafe around them, Emily felt a profound sense of possibility. She was no longer just the mother, the caretaker, the woman defined by duty. She was a woman stepping into a life of her own choosing, ready to embrace the warmth, companionship, and joy that she had long postponed. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that life could be gentle, beautiful, and full of love once more.